I would say stop optimizing for AI citations. Only 16% of AI prompts actually produce one. Focus much more on demonstrating your fit with different buyer personas and different criteria that you want to demonstrate fit for. I'm Tom Rudnai, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Tom, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one tip would be to stop optimizing for AI citations. So we've done a big study recently, and we found that only 16% of AI prompts within a complex buyer journey ever produce a brand citation. To give you a little bit of context on the study first, what we did was we were using AI to simulate complex buyer journeys across loads of different B2B categories, because we wanted to understand how responses vary at each stage from kind of awareness, consideration, through to conversion. What we found was citations were actually very rare and limited only to the conversion stage. So we know in a more complex journey, that's a very small part of the overall buyer journey. The majority is a lot more about how we define the problem, how we build requirements. So understanding that, it kind of taught us that citations are a really poor metric for actual AEO influence, because you're essentially measuring the tip of the iceberg. It's the 16%. And then if you're looking at things like traffic, you're even further downstream from that. So you're capturing a very small amount of the opportunity.
So what are dark AI conversations?
So dark AI conversations is what we call everything that you don't see when you're tracking what really SEO metrics, right? Because traffic, citations, these are metrics that are a holdover from SEO rather than actually native to AEO and to how AI search works, because it is different, right? It's not a directory. It's much more of a kind of co-pilot and a thought partner. I like to use my iceberg analogy. So if you think of that 16% of AI prompts in the conversion stage that produce a citation, that's what sits above the surface of the iceberg, right? And it's really clear, it's really easy to track with what most people are currently measuring. And that's how they assess the overall impact AI has on their brand, or on their buyers, I should say. Dark AI is everything that sits beneath the surface. So that's all of the conversations where customers are trying to understand the problem that they have that's relevant to you, understand what solutions are out there, what requirements they have, flesh out the need. And in a complex journey, all of that stuff beneath the surface of the iceberg is where the real bulk of the mass is. That's what we call dark AI, and it gets missed by current metrics.
Understood. So it's essentially questions that customers are asking AI that you won't have privy to actually understanding or seeing what customers are asking and what kind of conversations they're having. And just to clarify, it's not actually conversations that AI are having in between the AI and actually coming up with a solution for the customer. So it's not like an AI agent. It's simply the customer interacting with AI, but you're not having access to that analytics.
Yeah, it interacting with AI in a way that doesn't show up in the metrics that you're tracking. And what we tend to find is the more complex the journey, the more of it takes place in dark AI. It's quite useful sometimes to have a bit of a kind of example. So the way that I like to think about it is take a CFO of a big business, whatever business you like. I think of three things that CFO is going to purchase, right? So, okay, the CFO buys toothpaste. There is virtually no awareness and consideration stage, right? There is a very short journey from I've run out of toothpaste. Let's assume that they're not having to be made aware that they need toothpaste as a CFO. They run out of toothpaste and then they buy toothpaste and they get recommended Colgate's, whatever is on offer. It's transactional and there's no complexity to that journey, really, right? So everything is happening above the surface in our analogy. As you get more complicated, take trainers or headphones, there's a lot more requirements. Do you want them to be noise cancelling? Do you find that you're talking a lot out on the street? Are you active? Do you mostly office-based? All of that stuff will build into what headphones you are recommended. So the recommendation produces a citation and sits above the surface. All of that kind of criteria application and requirement building sits beneath the surface, and no brand gets mentioned there. When you take a next step in the complexity of purchase to a billing platform, before Stripe or Braintree or Zuora or any billing platform out there ever gets mentioned, there's like 10 different stakeholders that are trying to understand how they take payments, all of the different things that go into deciding, okay, what we need is a new billing platform, and now I'm going to ask for a recommendation that will produce a citation. So much more of the mass sits beneath the surface. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So what percentage, roughly, of buyer journey interactions are impacted by dark AI conversations?
So based on the analysis that we did, we found 84% sits within dark AI. So because 84% never produces a brand citation. So if that's what you're tracking, you are only going to capture. Now, this is going to vary a lot from industry to industry, generally based on the complexity of your purchasing journey. So if you're selling a product that is multi-stakeholder, so it takes 10 people to agree to buy that product in order to sell it, and it takes you 12, 18 months to sell, a billing platform being a really good example of something like that, right? It touches the CTO, the CFO, the CMO of a company that you want to sell to. Probably a lot more than 84% is about how each of those people frames the problem and understands the requirements that they have before they ask anyone which billing platform should I actually go and buy. Again, more simple, let's say we're a good example, right? You're selling an AI search optimization platform. We largely sell to the marketer. There might be a few other stakeholders, maybe at a more junior level. There's a content person and an SEO person, but it's a bit simpler. So there's a little bit less requirement framing and a little bit more, right, which product should I buy? So it's going to vary from category to category. We studied 14 different categories across B2B, and what we found was on average 84% of it.
Is there any hope for the average SEO to actually regain access to these analytics and actually discover how customers are interacting with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just changes at the moment. And this is maybe a slightly controversial opinion of mine, but I think the AI search industry has been largely built and shaped by people who were really good at SEO, right? The same voices. And it's very logical why those are the people that have adopted it. But they've approached everything through a very SEO lens, right? So everything still lives in that world of you want to rank, you want to just be seen in order to capture traffic. But there's a very different function in that the funnel itself is not a very useful framework for thinking about AI search because it doesn't just live early in the buyer journey like search did, right? Search was a directory. So a user went there to get pushed to your brand quite explicitly, right? That was what they were looking for. AI is not the same. It doesn't want to push people. So it only pushes people to your brand very late in the journey. Now, that changes an awful lot about what we have to track and how we have to approach optimizing it, because you have to optimize for all of those invisible conversations that came earlier. So is there hope? Yes, it just requires looking at different metrics. So some of the things that we propose, I would say in terms of strategy and measurement. So in terms of measurement, focus a lot more on demonstrating fit for different criteria. So if we're saying that, okay, the way AI operates is over the course of these journeys, it applies criteria. So it understands that you're a CMO at a big company with a complex marketing stack, all of these different requirements. What you want to do is really clearly demonstrate that you fit that specific person. So you don't want to be broad, you want to be specific. That's something that you can measure. We can use AI to do that. We can talk to the LLM, understand how it perceives your fit, what it thinks your strengths and weaknesses are, what it perceives the trade-offs of your product to be, and compare that to what you want and tell you how closely aligned those two things are. If those two things are 100% aligned, you're going to survive all of that problem framing in a really effective way. So it changes the way that you approach optimization, because your goal isn't these like broad statements of domination. We are the absolute best CRM out there that you could ever have for anyone. It's about being really specific on the trade-offs of your product, who you're for, how you win. I could go on for hours about that, but yes, there is hope. It's just a different strategy that you need.
Well, in terms of who you are, what you offer, you talked about how AI responds to different stages of the buyer journey. So, I mean, what would be your broad level summary of how AI responses change at different stages of the buyer journey, and what an SEO needs to do to be able to optimize more effectively for that?
Yeah, so let's split it up into those three: awareness, consideration, conversion. What we find is that over the course of that journey, the language evolves. So the language in awareness stage is very exploratory. It explores a broad range of options. So there's very high variability. If we run the same prompt in awareness stage 10 times, we're going to see different brands every time. So if you're consistently coming into that stage, it's a really strong signal that the AI considers you an important player in that category. You're helping it frame the problem, not just being visible as a solution. Yeah, so in awareness stage, very open, and high variability and exploratory language. What we notice is as you go through the funnel, so to speak, this trend called convergence takes place, where variability becomes much, much lower. Language becomes a lot more definitive, And essentially the same brands get surfaced over and over again, and they get surfaced much, much more confidently. So there's a couple of mistakes that this naturally leads you to as a marketer. It leads you to view that definitiveness, that confidence that the model gives you back as an endorsement of your brand. It's neither an endorsement nor a problem. It's because the AI does something called intent matching. So the AI is very clever in how it answers the user's query. So if the user inputs a conversion focused query that is essentially asking for a recommendation, then what it gets back is a recommendation. So the fact that you were visible there and you were recommended is not in itself an endorsement of your brand. It's an endorsement of the fact that you were one of the available options. We know that that's a tight option pool at the bottom of the funnel, and it will recommend everything at that point because that's what the user's asking it for.
Got you. Okay, and you also mentioned beforehand that citations are a bad North Star metric. What do you mean by that?
I think it would be, so if you're missing so much of your influence and you're missing so much of the potential influence that you could have, right? So if only 16% of AI prompts ever produce a citation, then if that's what you're building your model around, which I think is what most people have built their kind of business case for AI, we want to get cited more in AI, you're building it around a fraction of your potential influence. So what I would encourage people to do is try and push back against AI search optimization having the same role within the marketing funnel or the marketing kind of broader marketing team as SEO did. It's not something that sits at the top of the funnel that should have a kind of ranking or visibility metric associated with it. It's something that buyers are using at absolutely every stage. And if you do a better job of it, you improve every metric across the funnel. Yeah, I think things focusing on fit, on sentiment, things like that are much better reflections of how AI actually views your brand and of the optimization work that you're doing that capture a lot more of the impact that you are and could be having.
Okay, so you said fit and sentiment there. By fit, I presume you mean relevance to the conversation.
Yeah, so relevance to the persona that the individual is adopting, right? So if I go and prompt it, I'm going to say, okay, I'm Tom, I'm a founder at a startup in the AI search space. So what you want to understand is, okay, with all of those different criteria, industries, segments, stakeholders, use cases that people might apply and that you want to be viewed as strengths for you, how does your intention of your strengths fit the LLM's perception? And that's something like, so within our product, we help that because we understand the LLM's perception. We get you to tell us what you're intending, and we just track as a KPI the alignment between those two things. And your goal over the time is to create 100% alignment. And that means that consistently you're going to be presented in the way that you want to be to the right people.
So how do you optimize for optimum fit? Is it a case of using more case studies, more interviews maybe with happy customers just to demonstrate that whoever is actually having conversations with AI is obviously relevant in terms of relatable and similar to the customers that brand already has?
Yeah, broadly, I think it's generally speaking the same. You have the same tools in your toolbox as you had in an SEO world to influence AI. The way that I think of it is you have three levers that you can pull. You have your positioning, your content, and your reputation. And I like to think of those as 3 points on a triangle. Your goal should be to get those 3 points as closely aligned as you possibly can. When you're positioning, your content, and your reputation all say the exact same thing about who you are, what you do, who you're for, why you win, then you're being really, really clear. There's very little kind of ambiguity, very little inconsistency there. The position I think a lot of brands find themselves in is because an SEO mindset encourages brands to try and optimize prompts one-to-one as if they're keywords. What that leads you to do is produce loads and loads of content, right? Because there's so many different variations of every keyword. Like every one keyword could be 1,000 prompts. And so we're trying to optimize in a very SEO way. The challenge with that is it produces this explosion of content. Now, over time, within that exploded content, there are going to be lots of contradictions as to who you are. As your positioning shifts, your content is going to be out of sync with it. And what you create then is ambiguity because you've got all of these contradictions. It's very unclear looking at you, who you are. And so that's where you create a lot of opportunity for other people to go and define that, for the AI to make it up. AIs want to be confident. So one thing I would suggest to people that they need to do is I would suggest having much more of a plan for content maintenance than you did, because AI looks at your entire library to form a picture of you, not just the latest pieces that you've done or the specific piece that relates to that query. It looks at everything. So I think that's where it's quite a big mindset shift that sometimes taking an SEO focused approach isn't helpful for.
Tom, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I would say stop optimizing for AI citations. Only 16% of AI prompts actually produce one. Focus much more on demonstrating your fit with different buyer personas and different criteria that you want to demonstrate fit for.
Tom Rudnai is CEO and founder at Demand Genius. Find out more over at demand-genius.com. Tom, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thanks, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.